Good morning. My name is Matt Goldman, and this is my informative presentation over building construction and how it relates to the fire service. Today I will be discussing with you how building construction relates to the fire service in several ways. The first will be the history of building construction. The second will be the different types of building construction. And the last will be how the different types of building construction affects firefighting in general and the hazards that it presents for firefighters. According to Fire Rescue Magazine website, building construction is thought to be one of the most important things to firefighters that we should be aware of in their career. Building construction is constantly changing, and it is imperative that firefighters know the difference between all the different building types. I'm fascinated by the different types of building construction and how they affect the strategies of how we approach fires in general, just based off the different types. I've learned about building construction from Fire Academy, from certification classes, and from, in general, the fire ground. As I continue, I will discuss the different types again and how they change and how we approach fire suppression in general. The history of building construction goes way back. The International Fire Service Training Association, in the book of Building Construction Relates Fire Service, the history of building construction can be traced back over many years, actually over 2,000 years ago. The Romans built structures from materials as far as 2,000 years ago. Native Americans used teepees out of animal rawhide. Buildings were built using masonry and wood in the early 19th century. As the 19th century ended, metal masonry was introduced in the structures, and columns and steel trusses as well. Early in the 20th century, steel framing and elevators gave way to what are known as high-rise buildings today. In today's time, commercial and residential structures are being built with more combustible products such as foam for insulation, synthetic products, plastic for plumbing, and more laminated I-beams instead of natural heavy timber trusses. So there's a lot more combustible products in the newer construction in today's time, both commercial and residential. The different types is type 1 fire resistant, which is basically like a parking garage or a high-rise building. They're constructed of reinforced concrete and metal. Type 2 is non-combustible buildings, like your metal shops or commercial metal buildings. They're pretty much primarily composed of non-combustible fire-resistant materials. So that basically means they're reinforced with, or they're metal, but they're not reinforced with a non-combustible product. Type 3 is ordinary construction, which would be more like your commercial storefronts. They typically have masonry exterior siding with wood or metal structural components inside. Interior finishes may be also protected partially with gypsum board, which is sheetrock. Type 4 is heavy timber construction, which is typically like your churches or your mill work facilities, warehouses. The exterior is usually constructed of masonry products limited with non-combustible rating on them on that exterior. The interior is constructed using heavy timber. And the last one is type 5, which is your wood frame construction. What we know today is basically your residential structure that's all wood. Exterior is usually going to be masonry, but some of them are still built with wood siding. And the interior is made up of combustible wood structural components throughout. How fire suppression is different based off the types of construction. As we talked about before, type 1, the high rises, you'll see them, but it's not often that you'll see them on fire. It's usually the components inside of them that catch fire because they are reinforced with reinforced concrete and steel, so they're primarily composed of non-combustible materials, so typically it's the contents that catch on fire. Type 2, your metal shops or metal buildings, storefront, commercial buildings. The major components are non-combustible but have no fire resistance. Materials are made of unprotected steel, metal, and masonry exterior. Type 3, ordinary construction. Again, it's the masonry exterior. Interior finishes may be particularly protected with gypsum board, which we already talked about that, I'm sorry. So basically on type 1, I got to go back to type 1 construction. The challenges we face with that is obviously on a high rise, getting a large amount of people out of the structure, protecting the stairways, and also hoping that the fire suppression system is up to date per city code and that it works, because at the end of the day, that's the main thing that's going to help us suppress a fire on a high-rise building. On the metal shop buildings, the challenges that we're faced with are they can be large in general, so there's going to be a lot of water. But another problem that we can have with those is if it's a lightweight roof, you can have potential for roof collapse because it's made out of lightweight metal, and also the components inside of it, if it's congested with a lot of materials, that can create a hazard. Type 3, the commercial storefront, the biggest concern that we have with those is the void spaces built in them between the floor joists and the ceiling joists that can create hidden fires. Until we go in there and pull a ceiling out, we really don't know if there's fire back there or not. So that's one of the challenges we're faced with that. And then type 4, heavy timber construction. Contrary to belief, because they're built with heavy timber, you would think that they would be a threat to fire potential, but it's quite opposite, because it's a heavy fuel load, but it takes a lot of fire to create combustion with that heavy of timber. So typically the problems faced with those, like your churches or your warehouses, is going to be just the maintenance in general. Termite damage, people haven't painted them for years, and the residue of the old paint materials on the timber becomes flammable just because of poor maintenance. But that's usually the biggest concern on heavy timber construction. And then wood frame construction is kind of the same as ordinary construction. Your residential structures, there's going to be a lot of void spaces. And then also, like I talked about, all the synthetic and laminated glues and the products of that create combustion has a high potential for fire spread. So just in general, because the house is primarily made of wood, it can burn. It also has wood trusses that can fail in as soon as 4 minutes. So we have to be quick and aggressive on our fire attack. In conclusion, today I've discussed the history of building construction, the different types of building construction and how it affects fires in general, as our approach to fire suppression and how we treat each one differently. Understanding building construction as it relates to fire service can help firefighters aid in making safe and timely decisions to protect people and the property from the potential fires. In summary, building construction types are truly the building blocks of how firefighters operate on the fire ground. Knowing the different types of construction educates firefighters on when and where not to go into a burning structure. More importantly, it can be the deciding factor in saving someone's life. Thank you.